with insights for educators, families, and school and district leaders. This bi-weekly series runs Wednesdays, June 24th through September 2nd. Episodes are recorded and available to view later on YouTube and Facebook. In these webinars, we've been talking honestly about issues related to teaching and learning and leading and living in the time of coronavirus. We hope that these conversations and your questions will generate really valuable ideas and help us navigate this complex educational landscape together. You can submit questions throughout the conversation using the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. You'll also find closed caption access there. In this episode, I'm just thrilled to welcome Samantha Eigner-Trewergy and Maria Gonzalez-Moeller to our conversation. Samantha Eigner-Trewergy is the Commissioner of Early Education and Care here in Massachusetts. Prior to becoming Commissioner, she was the Chief of Early Learning for the City of Chicago, where she was the key architect of the city's early childhood strategic plan, which focused on reducing barriers for families and identifying administrative efficiencies across agencies. Samantha began her career in early education and care in the classroom, serving as a preschool teacher in Western Massachusetts and the Chicagoland area. We welcomed Commissioner Sam back to Massachusetts a year ago. Maria Gonzalez-Moeller is the Chief Executive Officer of the Community Group in Lawrence, Massachusetts. One of Moeller's main goals as CEO is to strengthen the community partnerships and collaborations in order to expand opportunities for the families they serve. Maria is an advocate for accessible, high-quality early education and care, and currently serves as a board member for the Massachusetts Association of Early Education and Care. We are very fortunate to have you both here today. Together, we'll explore what high-quality early education looks like in the era of COVID-19. I'm Noni Lasso, professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and chair of the Board of Early Education and Care in Massachusetts, and it's just a pleasure to host this conversation. Please join me in welcoming Samantha and Maria. Thanks everybody for coming. Let's launch in here and let's talk. What a time this has been. So I want to thank you both for your time today, but really much bigger picture for your tremendous work in the field of early education, supporting children and families and our early educator workforce through this challenging and complex time. This is in many ways a super important conversation at a very important time in the nation. Childcare has and will be always, of course, a linchpin in society at so many levels to support children's growth and development, to support families and caregivers to engage in their work and education, and to support the economy. It is an essential workforce and system. And 4 months in, many of us with young children are more than ready to offer them and up to a system to gain more focus and support in our own work, to give them the social experiences, the physical activity, the contact, the cognitive stimulation that we know is so critical for their development. But childcare is also a setting where we gather groups, where there's typically a lot of physical contact, close contact for communication, for care, for the learning, and for the teaching. So it's definitely complex, and there are real dilemmas and decisions facing everyone involved, as you both know so well. So before we get into some of the work, some more about the work itself, and I really can't wait to sort of tap your experiences and expertise. And as we look ahead to the reopening, before that, I'd love to just frame this up and ask you both to share with our audience just a piece of advice you might have for parents and caregivers of young children who are trying to manage through this really challenging time.
I'll start. I have more than one, and I hope that's okay with you. But number one for me was as I went through the last couple of months is stay on the ground and be hands-on. I mean, there is, we are somewhat reinventing ourselves and our field after what happens, and we should really internalize what our community is feeling in order to respond effectively. I mean, for me, it was really important. You know, as soon as the emergency program opened at our agency, I was one of the acting directors. I gave my cell phone to our families, to our staff. You know, it was overwhelming, but it was extremely helpful in finding out exactly what the community is feeling, so I could respond to it, and in shifting our energy into what really was needed. You have to be directly connected in order to understand it and help and provide that lens of empathy and equity that we really need right now. Number two is develop and nurture your partnerships. Partnering with our city of Lawrence, with other community nonprofits, with the state, and with other early education providers was, you know, I cannot talk about how important that is enough. It was, you know, it just took away that whole sense of we're alone working on this. And it really was, we're on a case, we are basically on a case basis level. You know, this is unprecedented. So we need to be exposed to different cases in order to learn and see how we're going to act on it. And third, and most general, but also very important for me, was do not let fear drive your decision making. One of the biggest challenges is the unknown. And there's so much unknown about this at an operational level, but also at a physical health and personal level. And fear could really eliminate the potential for opportunities that this crisis may provide for our field and for our families. You know, we can address the issues that will minimize this fear, but the guiding question should be, what would you do? You know, just like the phrase, what would you do if you were not afraid? You know, this is a real opportunity that we have here.
Yeah, and the fear, the parenting with fear is really hard for kids. It's debilitating. They pick up on your anxiety. It's an abstract concept, this virus, and how much they need to know really depends on their age and what they can handle. Sam, what are your thoughts about some advice for parents with young children trying to make it through this complex time?
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to build on both what you and Maria said, is that it is for sure not being fear-based here, particularly with young children. And I think really remembering that children absorb and react to what you put out. And so I think, you know, I agree, the anxiety can sometimes trump what our best judgment. And I think to trust your best judgment, to trust that in yourself and what you know about your children, and to remember that if you can bring the positivity and the inquiry-based as opposed to fear-based approach with them, they'll respond with that and be joyful learners around this unique time that we're all learning about simultaneously, and be can be, I think I find it can be a highlight and remembering that it's not all bad. It's forcing us to learn new things, and children are doing that all the time. And so giving them an opportunity to do so, despite the fact that it feels overwhelming at the moment.
Yeah, no, you're right. And trying to tap into their own curiosity, which is out there every single day, right? Absolutely. Yeah. I should also say that in our house, I decided 3 months in, I better introduce the concept of silver linings, that we might as well, right, go after the gratitude, go after some of the silver linings. What are we doing differently that we like about this new lifestyle, et cetera?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's dive in. You were both instrumental to standing up in Massachusetts what was an emergency childcare system for essential workers. And in this state, we served about 10,000 children across about 550 sites through the very intensive first phase of the crisis. Let's talk about some lessons learned and think about what did you learn given your different roles and lenses that might also inform our work going forward and the role of childcare in society? Maria, do you want to start us off?
Sure, I'll start a little bit on that. So the first one is not really a lesson, but more of a reaffirmation of the importance of childcare, right? You know, in our communities, and the importance and the impact that childcare has in our families, especially the families that are in crisis and those children that are under the custody of the Department of Children and Families. when we closed, an entire support layer was eliminated from our communities. And, we are conduits of very important services for families. We are the eyes for some of the most important state agencies, including EEC, DCF, and the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in some regards. It took some time before early education programs closed, and we couldn't even close without an alternative, which was emergency childcare. At that point, I was feeling a little bit like we have a little bit of imposter syndrome at our field. And, I would like to, in terms of the lessons I learned, I would love to work together with EEC in getting louder about, advocacy and the importance of early childhood education and childcare services for our communities. Operationally, also, some of our priorities have shifted because of these lessons. We recognize the importance of communication. We were very good at communicating one-on-one with families and being culturally aware, actually, in Lawrence, in our agency. But we realized that we didn't have very efficient ways of communicating remotely with families or collecting useful data that we didn't even know we ever needed. There's no more drop-off and pick-up conversation with parents. Right. And, addressing these communication barriers for families and for our agency is going to become a priority right now. Also, the importance of trust and confidence with families, another lesson that we learned. This needs to continue being developed, and I talked a little bit about that already. But many families, we have their children, so there is trust there. There's an immense amount of trust there already. So many families reached out immediately, asking for resources beyond childcare. Right. And in order to help them, that's where our partnerships came into play, where we were able to refer them efficiently and not reinvent the wheel and helping them with things that we're not really experts at. So we were able to really efficiently help these families. And that's so important when funding is limited too, obviously. A lot of the cultural shifts too, transparency and data seems really important for us right now. We always strive to do this, but right now those lenses have to be there all the time in order to build trust and efficiency, like I already said. Parent support. We centralize our parent support system across the agency because there's no child support without parent support. We have to, right now there needs to be a 2-generational approach. That's something that we shifted right away and we'll continue to prioritize. And then the curriculum priorities, last but not least, we need to incorporate more social, emotional, and mental health needs at this point. Many families are in crisis.
Yeah, no question. Yeah, the affirmation of the system is so essential in our communities, that it's tied to children's health and safety, right? And their well-being every day. That came clear particularly through the first phase. But the communication strategy piece is super interesting as well, right? That we can be very good at the kind of ground level with parents and families, but now we needed a different kind of way of communicating. And parents needed support and resources, and they trusted you, which is a further affirmation of where this fits in our communities as a cornerstone institution.
Sam, a lot of it, I wasn't sure a lot of it was lessons, but it was really, like you said, reaffirmation and realization of
exactly right. That in many ways the crisis lifts things up, right? That we had known and thought about, but it becomes more amplified. Sam, thoughts on your look back and look ahead based on the emergency situation?
Yeah, and it's interesting, Maria, you talk about it from the program level, but I think, as you said, the whole system has been learning, and I think learning many similar lessons. And so I think that there is, in early childhood, as we've looked at systems, we have built such an emphasis on the really, really important dynamic of quality and what kind of really needs to happen in between those interactions between the adult and the child, the children as a peer groups that really help foster development. In all of that, I think one of the questions that really called to the forefront in a different way in the emergency was the infrastructure question. And that while you're focusing on that human capacity, this is a critical infrastructure that is that we need to have in place in order for even the baseline economy to function, even the essential workers. To Maria's point, the idea that this is a critical workforce that needed to be protective and closing down was about a bigger public health issue, but that we couldn't even protect our ourselves in a closed economy if we didn't have something. And I think it called into a different conversation about childcare, which has allowed us to sort of start to navigate what does it mean to be a public good, and how do we have those public expectations of what is delivered in that public good as an infrastructure. I think that there are two other components I want to make sure that I am also just addressing here is the workforce component. I think that one of the things that we learned really critically early on as we built an emergency childcare system was that this was requiring new and creative approaches from all of our workforce, whether that be a director, whether that be an educator or family childcare, that balancing how you do what you know. And coming from the classroom, I say all the time, like it would be rethinking every strategy I learned to understand how do you hold to the principles, but do it in a new way. And so I think that the burden of that in the workforce, but also the opportunity with that in the workforce to understand how we highlight that they are experts, that you do know what you're doing. And it's not about, it's not punitive. It is about, getting back to that best judgment, as I said. And finally, I want to just say around the communication, you talked about it in terms of parents, but I think that it was so incredibly critical in terms of the field as well. And one of the things we spent, there's never enough, so I'm not even going to claim that it was enough, but one of the things we tried really hard to do was even when we didn't have an answer, I think one thing that bureaucracy often then stumbles upon is how do you say, I don't know, and how do you find the answer quickly, as opposed to just retreat back into your hole. And if we are really going to rebuild childcare and learn from this, one of the things we learned is it has to be in dialogue and it has to be in partnership. And so that means transparency. It means sharing data when we have it. It means saying we don't know things when we don't know it. But we're in this place where no one knows anything, so we're all learning together. And so how critical it is for that communication, the communication approach, to be willing to be learning as well as distributing information.
Yeah, that's great. This is great. And it's interesting how the issues sort of at the ground are mirrored up at the systems level, and that some of the advice that we have for parents is actually reflected in how we're thinking about better supporting our workforce, et cetera. Let's turn now to opportunities. I mean, any rebuild after a major crisis, well, it's obviously difficult given the tremendous loss, the economic impacts, also does represent opportunities for innovation, right? For new ways of working. If you had to just sort of say, take a moment and tell us about some of the opportunities that you see that lie ahead for children, for families, for early education, and name one or two, and let's look forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think Sam talked a little bit about briefly about one is we're thinking what high quality looks like right now for the children across our state, and collect important new, now that we know what we know with the new data that we have. So, curriculum needs to shift a little bit in terms of the priorities right now. And I already talked about the 2-generation approach. The financial model too, obviously, is an opportunity because we knew there were challenges there before, and now there's bigger challenges now. So we definitely need to move forward with that, and have a financial model that works for everybody and that sustains and gives stability to the field. And a huge opportunity to bring in that lens of equity for women, which are the majority of our field, and children and families, especially children and families in the subsidized system.
Yeah.
As we develop new policies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I want to build on that. And I think the financing structures is a really important opportunity for us to reconsider. Right now in childcare, it functions on a per family funded business model, right? Where, and you think about it the way that any luxury service, whether that be yoga or whether that be, a restaurant that is, I want a service and I pay for it. And for subsidies, we may subsidize a family's costs there and subsidize and help replace the tuition requirement or something along those lines. But as a society, I think one of the questions as we head into the year ahead is to ask, is that a sustainable model? model. And if we are paying per child in a business model for critical infrastructure in a period where the demand is going to fluctuate because we are in a health crisis, and that parents are going to make decisions based on their family needs, what they're seeing in their community, and all sorts of dynamics that have nothing to do with the long term. And so we can't, if we're really thinking about this as a critical infrastructure, we have to understand what that kind of business model does to something we believe should be there when we come out of this crisis. And that families, demand will increase, right? At some point, we will be on the other side of this, and parents will need childcare at the same rate as they did, right? When they go back to work, when things shift, but families still need childcare. How do we make sure that that critical infrastructure is there? And the financing structures right now, I think, don't lead us to a sustainability during a time of transition.
Yeah. Yeah, we continue in this country, right, to talk a lot about the promise of early ed, to talk in many ways about how crucial it is for young children, for families, for economic development, but we haven't funded it with that same language, right, of infrastructure, of essential. And so this kind of pay to play means that, you know, we may or may not have the system when people are finally ready to go back. Yeah, I take your point entirely. And I think it is, again, the crisis sort of amplifies, shines a light on the pressure points and the opportunities, and the critical next step is to really get into those pressure points and opportunities and solve them in new ways, right? Longstanding problems solved in new ways.
Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
You know, I think the other thing that I have thought a lot about, just given my own professional work and my work with all of you in the field, is it's interesting to me to think about families having a new lens on their children's learning. That one sort of opportunity, if you will, that sort of one consequence of all of this is that I do think many working parents are much closer to the experience of the window into children's learning and development, and sort of having that closer lens. That's interesting to me if we think about that we're always going for stronger family partnerships, right?
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's important. And Noni, I just want to highlight something there, if you don't mind, when you think about that, is we've talked about distance learning as a sort of monolith, but with young children, it actually looks very different. And it really is about that human to human interaction. It's very difficult. And I can't tell you, I don't have children, I will say I have lots of nieces and nephews, but it's very difficult. I have many friends and nieces and nephews said, I can't get my 5-year-old to sit in front of a Zoom and watch his teacher. Right? Like that's not actually how 5-year-olds learn, or 4-year-olds or 6-year-olds. Like young children need that communication. So as we talk about distance learning over the long haul, it really is going to require a family engagement and family capacity that we're going to have to figure out how to engage with in different ways too. And I think there's an appreciation of what that means for the professionals in our field as we go back to a new normal in a new way from parents, which is, I think, an opportunity.
Yeah. And I agree. And I think as there's been pressure on the system to have it look more and more like school, like the traditional school, the kind of outdated school, the like, I want to see the worksheets, I want to see the letters and numbers being drawn, it might have helped with a little bit of that reset, right? That the structured play is synonymous with learning, that when we're practicing and it doesn't look and sound like something perfect, we're actually learning. But it is interesting. Maria, were you going to jump in there?
I think, well, you were talking about K-12 and about, children, school-age children. I think one of the,
I think that this happens with 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds too.
That's right? True too. But it's important to just make sure that we align with school age as well, in terms of early childhood, and make sure that the practices, as we implement practices in reopening, since we're talking about that, it's really important that are consistent, though. I really don't want to, inconsistent practices across the, ages are going to end up in some sort of a lack of trust from parents in terms of who's wrong and who's right and why they're doing it differently. So I think it's really important to do that. That's an opportunity, again, for further alignment.
Yeah. I think the 0 to 8 span and sort of understanding 0 to 10, even what does the learning look and feel like is really interesting. And I just wonder if there's more of a window. I'm going to jump now to just a couple quick questions from our audience. We have one question from an educator that sort of says, you know, I'm supposed to go back to my center in September, but I am feeling nervous. What should educators look for to ensure health and safety in their own work?
Well, I'm happy to talk from our perspective, and then I'll hand over to Maria to talk about a little bit more on the ground. I think, you know, as I look at our emergency childcare system and in the 5,000 or so programs that have reopened to date in Massachusetts, I think that the fundamental part is twofold. One, it can be done safely. If you look at requirements, if you look at the best practices and you think about applying that, it can be done safely, and I will put that joyfully for children, that there are, right, it is about masks, it is about health and hygiene practices, it is about limiting exposure, but it can be done safely and happily in our childcare settings. I think that one of the other things I would keep in mind is, in order to do it safely, it is about the practices, but it's also about the preparation. We know we are in situations where emergencies are going to happen, and the way you prepare for an emergency is to have a plan. So think through those options of what happens if something happens in my classroom, what happens if, and come up with a plan. And no plan's going to fit every emergency precisely, but at least it grounds you in that muscle memory to figure out, oh, wait, if someone has symptoms, okay, I put them over here, and then I figure out what to do, and it gives you some ability to do that. And I think what we've seen in all of our childcare system is those two things absolutely protect our environments from a transmission, and help people be able to navigate this really difficult time with the integrity that our childcare facilities deserve.
Can we take one more minute, Maria? Can you speak to how young children are by and large very flexible and adaptive if we're consistent and we get them ready for it? Can you talk about how to do this both safely, as Sam says, but also where's the relationship building in this? How would you describe sort of the critical next step in terms of relationship building, given the isolation to date?
So, well, like Sam said, I mean, it has been, the benefits of running an emergency program or having that example from the state or across the state, it's that, you know, we did prove that it was possible, that, you know, we had minimum issues with exposure or long-term effects, or, you know, thankfully, but just training, so many components though, you know, in order to, we first have to do it safely, and then we have to prioritize the emotional bonding and, you know, the social emotional learning. However, teaching children how to protect themselves, it's a social emotional experience on itself. I mean, I think our curriculum right now, it's personal, and it really includes social emotional learning for the children, but it's really about teaching them how to use a mask, you know, make sure that, why do we use a mask? Right. How often do we wash our hands, you know, and why do we do that? You know, they are seen, I mean, like you said at the beginning, children notice what we're doing, and they notice our interactions with each other, you know, they notice our fear as well. So, you know, this is why it's really important to make sure that we train our teachers and prepare, you know, to welcome the children and let them know that they're safe at our space, and families as well. You know, communication with the families and trust building with the families is critical, and as I already said. Yeah. But knowing that emergency childcare centers ran in the state, and we have the supplies available in collaborate, you know, in partnership with EEC, is key as much as communicating regularly with them.
And getting it right is building strong relationships, because we're engaging in routines that are shared and together. And right. It is community building, because we're bringing this institution back into our lives and these partnerships back into our lives. Yeah. Well, I really want to thank you both. This was a short 30 minutes. Wow. It's been fabulous to have this conversation. I think we should have another at some point as we get farther along and learn more and more about the challenges and the opportunities, and continue to partner with the field as we go forward. But please let me just reiterate a great big thanks to both of you for your service to the Commonwealth, to children and families, and to the nation. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to everybody for attending. It's been a great session, lots of good things to think about, and wonderful to see you all here. We hope to see you again in 2 weeks. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.